What are your favorite ways to bring life and movement to a static mix?
Well, I mean, I have a few tricks that I've used, whether I was mixing in the computer or mixing on a console. And, for me, there are different aspects that are the tools that we use that are in the palette that we use in order to be able to paint a picture with sounds. And so we have control over how close up things are or how far away they are. We have control over their place in the frequency spectrum, how bright they are or how dark they are. And we have control over where they can be placed in the stereo field. So it could be over here, it can be over there, it can be in the middle. And those are the tools that we use in order to create space in a mix and be able to, and really the job of a mixer is to make sure that everything can be heard in the mix and be able to maintain some degree of separation between the elements. So the listener can go, oh, I hear this part, I hear that part, I hear this part. And so I'm always using those three main tools in order to achieve that and compartmentalize the frequencies that particular elements in a mix are occupying and being able to place things in particular spots in the stereo field to be able to maintain that definition between different parts. And I'll use that stuff in order to breathe more dynamics and life into a mix. And so you can have a song that starts off where I don't use the full width of the stereo field. And just by a little bit, just have things in just a little bit. And when the chorus comes and you want everything to just open up and get bigger and sound, more epic, all of a sudden, everything gets wider. You can add more high-frequency elements and more sub-frequency elements. So it expands in this direction in frequency. It expands in this direction in width. And you can even play with the depth of things, add things that are further away. So now there's a more sense of depth in the mix. So by adding and subtracting with those main elements of a mix, you can have huge control over the dynamics. I'm also a huge fan of actually pushing levels at places like the downbeat of a section. If you want that to feel eventful, I use a little fader thing. I don't have it in front of me. This thing. So I can still have that tactile, experience. I'm just so used to doing it on a console, and it's very fast for me to go. Instead of drawing lines on a screen, I can just select each track, and the chorus comes up, and I just go boom, and then sort of ease it off with the fader, and it just makes that beginning of that section just have this impact and energy to it that you just feel just by sheer volume alone, And so that's something I've been doing for decades,
Do you ever have, or do you ever are stuck during a mix? Because it happens to me all the time. I feel stuck. I don't know what to do. So do you? Does it happen to you? And do you have any tricks or ways to break through, creative blocks?
I do. First thing is to just walk away. That means just walk away. Walk outside, go get a coffee. I will start a mix quite loud in the room. My big speakers, my ATCs. And I will I'll kind of feel it when I know I should stop that, right? And I'll stop, and then I'll either walk out into my tracker room, or I'll go up front and see what's going on with Cohen, or I'll just, exit for a bit, come back, and then on my monitor controller, because I don't use the monitor controller on my desk, I just have it wide open. I have an Avocet. I have little red dots that I've drawn in with Sharpie, where those are don't go beyond this, right? Stop here. You listen here, listen here, listen here, listen here. And I will just come down to the next set, move from the ATCs to the ProAx, and then I'll start doing the second level of listening, sort of balancing there. And then I'll stop again. And usually by that point, I might want another coffee or a water or something else. When I come back, I'll move to my NS10s, and that will be about 70 70 to 75 dB. So very, very quiet. And then all the way to the very last mix stage, well, I'll be listing at about 69 dB. So, so do I get stuck? Sure. You know, if I really get stuck on a mix, it's usually because it's like I'm doing two songs a day. It's the second song, and I'll just stop, go home. You know, come in the morning and listen, and then usually I'm like, oh, well, that's not so bad, or I'm like, oh, what the hell? I just turn all the faders down, start over.
Cool.
Sometimes that's a really good thing. Sometimes you can get a balance, get your EQ, get your compression all, and then your balance is all wrong. And sometimes you get all that stuff. And you're like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to turn all that down. I'm going to do a new drum balance, turn that down, you know, and then push everything up and try to find the balance with all the EQ and compression and things in, and see if you find a different position. My friend Richard Dodd tells a great story about doing a record with Glenn Johns.
Oh, cool.
Right? So Glenn Johns hired him to mix something, which is hilarious. And because, I mean, you know, obviously it's Glenn Johns, and I mean, I would be just crapping my pants. But Richard said that he was great. He was wonderful. And on one song, he said, I need to listen to something, Richard. And so he came in, and before they'd started mixing, and he just started kind of hit play and push the faders up. And he said he just kind of did that for like 5 minutes. And he goes, and it was that perfect Glenn Johns mix. And he was like, you know, no EQ, no anything. Just did it. And he had recorded it. So, you know, then he was like, oh, yeah, okay, great. And he just turned the faders down. Richard's like, no, that was great. And he goes, no. I want to hear what you hear. I want to hear what you hear. I want to hear what you hear here. I know what I hear. I do it all the time. Yeah, I want to hear what you hear. So I think that the thing we live in this world is that a lot of times when we're producing records, we're probably not the person who should be mixing. Should get another set of ears on it. The bad part is today, a lot of our budgets just don't allow it. You know, I mean, I would love to have the budget to pay one of my friends $20,000 to mix a record that I'm producing. The problem is that's the whole budget sometimes, you know, and, you know, and when it comes to like working with labels, you know, sometimes you're making a record for a label and it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. They've got some guy that they want because they know exactly what he does. And, you know, you do your job, you do the best you can, and then you go from there.
So do you usually start with the vocals then?
No, I start with a rough mix. I immediately, you know, I don't do anything first other than the first thing I do is when I get the multi-track or the DAW, I put up the session, I put up all the faders, and then I run it down once or twice, get a rough balance that to me captures what the song is about. And then from that point, I'll start working on individual elements. But I very seldom solo. I'm not interested in what the voice sounds on its own. I want to know what it sounds in relation to the guitars and the other instruments. So when I first started out, I used to start with the drums. And I'd get these incredible drum sounds. And then as I added the mix, you lost everything because either it wasn't right for that mix, or more importantly, the elements were being clouded by other elements in the mix that were more important. So after spending, you know, a couple hours getting a drum sound and then moving into that, you suddenly say, this isn't right. So that's when I started, back in the 80s, late 80s, early 80s, I guess. I started rough mix, and by then I was working, you know, in digital and or with the recall consoles. So as I'm building the rough mix, I'm keeping track of that, the automation, right from the beginning. I automate everything on the console all the time. Most people leave it all in manual and, do the stuff. But from the first pass on, I'm in write mode. Every EQ, every compressor, every fader is in write mode. And when I get to the end, I save it and go to start again. So if I ever do a rough mix and send it to the artist and they come back and they love it and we do the final mix, they say the rough was better, I can get back to that right away. Mm-hmm. Everything, effects, the whole deal, because it's been saved. Mm-hmm. So it can be cumbersome sometimes. It does take up a lot of resources. And if you're not careful, you can say, write to all on something and blast everything away without realizing it. But, I'm at a point now where I'm so confident in my work with it that doesn't really become an issue anymore. And again, if I have to go back a step or two, I will. So, when we were building these digital consoles, I was doing a lot of beta testing on them. And I would lose days back in the early Capricorn days and stuff. Because the software wasn't right yet. And it was very frustrating. But now, with Pro Tools or whatever, the worst you lose is a couple minutes if you're always being backed up.
What do you think is the number one mistake engineers with less experience make that causes their mixes to sound lifeless and flat?
I would say there's two number one mistakes. One, your monitoring is not good enough and you're trusting it somehow. So you're basically mixing into what I call a dirty canvas. Like you're trying to make a painting, but your canvas is not white. It is dirty and bent. And you're trying to paint with your best intentions, like your best musical knowledge that I was just talking about, your best blends. You're mixing it into a canvas that's not neutral, which means it gets, even though it sounds good to you, because you're making all the right decisions, like musically speaking, this is too loud, this is too soft. It doesn't come out like that because your room doesn't translate. Now, what do we take from there is like either you have to be more careful, and that's where car checks come in other studios and 3 different kind of monitors and headphones, etc., or you improve your listening experience, which comes with investments of money, right? But on the other hand, we can either invest time or money, and hopefully just a little bit of both. But the less you fix your problem, the more time you will spend working around that problem. So that's the biggest thing. And connected to that maybe is trying to fix problems that your monitoring creates for you at the same time. And that's something that I talk to people a lot about bass and the bottom end, right? So I get asked a lot, especially like master classes that I do for SAE or Berkeley, or there's the CMA, which is in China. They ask me like, how do you get a tight, big, even low end, right? And because everybody seems to be scared, like low end seems to be hard, is what people think, right? And I say, I actually think the actual mixing of the low end is super, super easy. Because there's not many things you're going to do. You might volume right it a little bit, I hope. Well, in lieu of that, you might compress the bass too much, but okay, whatever you want. But you're trying to get the bass a little bit more even. And you choose an overall level and maybe an EQ, but think about it, there is really not that much happening in the low end of a record. Actually, if it is somewhat well designed, there's a kick drum, hopefully one, sometimes more, as you know, and there's a bass, sometimes more. Okay, but most of the other instruments don't reach down into the very low end, so they should not be there, so to speak. Right. So part of the mixing of the record is cleaning up the crud from other instruments reaching into the low end, so to speak. But when they asked me, so how do I get the good bass? I was like, the problem is not your technique of mixing the bass. The problem is that you can't hear the bass. Like in your studio, it's most likely, unless you spend considerable amount of resources and time, etc., your low end is not flat. This room is flat down to 25 hertz. So it's really easy. If I put up a fader, I hear if there's a wolf note. I don't know if you guys know what that is. A wolf note, for instance, is a on a cello. Like you play a scale down into the low end, and one or two notes will reach out very, very loud in amplitude, and that's normally part of the instrument. The instrument itself is maybe not fully balanced, so to speak. So even though the player is actually playing the same thing, the wolf note reaches out as a frequency that resonates a lot. And some players accommodate for that or know where that is, and some don't, etc. It will be recorded, but in my situation, I just hear it, and I can counteract it with a very small EQ move, which means also I cannot tell you what to do. I cannot tell you 60 hertz needs boosting because I haven't heard the bass, right? But it's very easy for me because I hear the bass. Hear what needs fixing. Now, one of the biggest mistakes or hardest thing to wrap your mind around is if your room is compromised in sound, especially in the low end, and you just mix into that and you make actual decisions. Like, for instance, you program a 808, but your room is off. So now if you're actually changing the velocities of the 808, or maybe put multiband compression on it, or EQ single notes in order to hear a very cool low end, which is already tainted by the low end in your room because you can't hear it correctly, you're actually making stuff worse. You're actually making decisions into a medium that's not there, so to speak. So people actually are a little bit confused, or they're like, really? When I say, if you know already that your room doesn't sound good in the bass, I feel that you have a better chance to come out with a even big bass, whatever, if you do nothing. Because most likely the programming, like the samples, are probably pretty evenly laid into your sampler, or if you're mixing, the producer hopefully didn't mess it all up. You can see it sometimes on the waveform how far off it is. But literally, if there was an 808 and had velocities that are straight and the sample is normal, then the waveform should already be even, which means if you just choose a level, hey, I need this much bass or this much bass, you should be in okay shape. If you don't touch it, if you now start EQing it, you will destroy that baseline in relation to each other, to the next note. So the wisdom to go like, well, I know my studio is not great, so maybe I should just ignore the bottom for now instead of trying to fix around it. I think that's one of the bigger issues with translation and actually, messing up a mix, because you can easily introduce muddiness or just weight that is really not there, or the or the opposite, like it's too thin because your room is resonant, etc. But had you just not touched the bass, it would be a better outcome. So yeah, that would be it.
One of the biggest issues I see when with people mixing in their home studios is not being able to hear the low end properly. Do you have any tips for them?
One thing that helped, I wouldn't say it's a solution, right? It's really cool. But years ago, a company named Subpack approached me. And there's one of those tactile.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So I wouldn't say it's, it is. To be honest with you, it's not a perfect solution, but it does save your ears a little bit, right? So like on the low end, like for example, the super low end, I'm talking 40 hertz and below. When I'm mixing, for years, my home bass room was Studio C at Circle House in Miami, right? That's pretty much where I worked. That was my home base. And there we have the biggest Jennies, with the 18s. So I'm in there, I'm having to push, over 110 dB to actually feel, my shirt move, right? And I know it sounds insane. But the Subpack allowed me to sort of get the same feeling at a very low level, right? So I can come down to like a regular set of NS10s, have the sub pack really light, and that balance can really help you. Like if you're at home and you got a pair of, just Yamahas and you can't really like hear, below 40, feeling it could help. And another thing that's really weird that I did for years was I always put my thumb on the side on the cushion of the speaker. And that for some reason in my mind translated. I could hear or feel, 35 hertz or, something like that. There's ways around it, man. But honestly, it's practice. Like, the more you do it, the more you'll get out of a speaker that doesn't generate or can, reproduce very low frequencies. And yeah, sub pack or any tactile like that definitely helps.
Yeah, I completely forgot about the sub pack, and the weird thing is that after using it maybe for 5 minutes, you stop feeling the low end, and just for me at least, and I thought I was listening to the low end, or it came from my speakers. So yeah,
it's wild, man. I remember the first time they sent me I still got it. Matter of fact, I whip it out every once in a while. I'm like, let me check to make sure, because it's a different type of your brain, like you're saying, your brain adjusts, and it's a different type of like. Measurement, I guess, that you start thinking about. So sometimes I'll grab it to be like, oh, I know how that's supposed to feel, right? But like when they first sent it to me, I got it. I was like, oh man, I cranked that boy up, and it made me sick, man. Like after like 10 minutes, I felt like car sick. I was like, so I called them. I go, yo, is this? They're like, bro, you got to take it. You got to chill out. So once I got sort of like the sweet spot, and now it's very light. It's just enough for you. It's almost like when I, like I said, touching my thumb to the actual, speaker. It's the same feeling. Your brain kind of adjusts and can hear it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I will try that again because I stopped using it because I had back problems. So yeah, after I don't know a couple of hours,
it's not the most comfortable for sure.
So, and aside from the acoustic issue, why do you think beginners struggle so much to achieve a good low end in their mixes?
Probably that. A lot of people overshoot it. You know what I mean? They just kind of overthink it. If I'm being honest. I did the same thing when I started. Like one of the hardest things for me to sort of get past was like not like trying too hard, right? Like doing too much. I think what happens, especially today, because from where I come from, it was all in the console. I mean, you had gear, but you couldn't just pop in as many compressors as you wanted. You kind of had to be selective. And now you have so many choices, and I feel like people sort of like they feel like they have to pop stuff in. And there's something to be said about just putting a sound up. You know what I mean? Just listen to it, And I know you can't hear the low end well, but if you feel like, okay, this feels pretty good, you can go in the car, you can listen to other places, and you feel like the sound is okay. Sometimes it's all right to leave it alone. Just a little saturation, a little EQ on the low end, maybe a little compression. You don't have to have, 7, 8 plugins going in just because you feel that they're, what the pros use. There's records that are huge that the 808 just worked. And all I had to do is drop a little EQ on it. I left it alone. But it takes years to figure that out,
What would you say is the most common mistake someone makes when they're starting to use compression in their mixes?
Oh, interesting. I mean, there's no rules to any of this. So, if it sounds good to your ear, great. I mean, to me, the song, I say this all the time, and 1176 never wrote a great song, and it's true, but if you really, common mistakes would be too much compression. I mean, it's just kind of like the attack is too fast, the release is too fast, or sometimes it's the opposite where it's like, they didn't, I mean, not hearing enough attack is never a bad thing, but then, yeah, it's hard. I mean, because compression is, I mean, you can do you can fix compression with expansion, which is the opposite, obviously. And yeah, so it's hard. I mean, that's a hard question to answer, but I see it a lot, and sometimes you just got to let it be what it is.
So your vocals sound so upfront and without any harshness. How do you do that?
I spend a lot of time trying to dial out the shit that shouldn't be there, that's not musical, that's not really adding anything except ear fatigue. And I just try and bring out the essence of the musicality of the vocal as much as I can, and make sure that like I'm a fan of compression. I tend to keep the vocals compressed and right on top. But to me, I think it's mostly in how you de-ess and how you control the S's and how you control kind of the things that bother your ears and bring out the musical elements of it.
So how do you deal with the harshness? Do you use any particular plugin?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways. So one way is the Soothe plugins, those kinds of things. Sometimes Soothe works really well, not only for like that kind of 3 to 5K harshness that can really get aggressive, but also if you've got like a really kind of muddy vocal, you can set your detector to only look at from like 0 to 500, and you can find where those resonant frequencies are not really doing you any favors down in the bass, and you can work to just let Soothe dial those, not dial them out, but reduce them to where they're musical again. And so I think there's a whole bunch of different ways to go after that stuff. The other way is, there's 1,000 ways to use a de-esser. If the top is too aggressive, I'll use just a top shelf. But if you've got too much of like that kind of stuff, all of that is like 2,500 to 4.5. And the way to get that is with I'll use like a Waves Ren de-esser in a notch, and I'll just I'll listen. I will listen to the center of the notch, and on the the listen band. Can't remember what that thing is called. The listen band. So I'll dial in the center of the harshness on the listen band, and then I'll decide how much I should take out of that still sounds. It's always this fight between you want to keep it sounding musical and natural, but you want to reduce the ear fatigue. So there's always a balance that you just have to listen for and work towards.
So could you explain us when and why to use compression?
Good question. I think we all get used to certain styles, certain habits, certain sounds. Things like electronic keyboards, electric guitars don't always need a lot of compression. But if you want a little bit more aggression and power, it's something to do. If you want to keep the sound tighter, smaller, more contained. The one thing I really won't do is it's rare for me to look at the gain reduction meter. I'll just turn knobs till it sounds right to me. And then if all of a sudden it sounds like it's too compressed, if I hear the compressor working, then I might go and look at the compression meter and say, okay, it sounds a little too compressed to my ear and it looks a little too compressed. So I have to back it off. But I won't kind of go by any rules or try to be overly or under cautious about it all. I'm precious. I just kind of, I'm not a technical guy. I'm just one of those people that turns knobs until they get lucky. And my whole career is based on luck, basically. It's sort of like you're playing slots. You're just turning shit until something gets you excited, and usually if it gets you excited, it's going to get a lot of other people excited. So I just kind of go for it and don't think too much about what's right and what's wrong. I mean, if I have to err, I always err on the cautious side, meaning less compression, slower attacks, faster releases. That keeps things more honest and natural. And in general, especially with vocals, work from a place of a slower attack and a faster release. I like to keep the vocal big and honest sounding, but there are times that you want a tighter, smaller vocal that just sits in a place in the track, perhaps in a wall of guitars. So then I might get a little bit more aggressive with the attack times.
What are the fundamentals of a good mix?
For me, there's only one fundamental. that doesn't move me. If it moves me, I don't really care about the rest of it. I often use this as an illustration, but when I was a kid and you would hear What's Going On or Day in the Life or anything really, Ticket to Ride, and you'd hear that on an AM radio, it would move the shit out of you. Now that's an AM radio. If you think MP3 sound bad, go to an AM radio. And yet we were singing, dancing, the vibe was there. So for me, it's got to move me. If it moves me emotionally, and then someone says, well, what else about this mix that you like? Well, if I have to analyze it, I'll analyze it. I think in pop music, at least, you have to have a really great, tight bottom end. Your bass and bass drum have to be there. I'm always disappointed in a mix if I can't feel that rhythmic underpinning. So I think it needs that. I am always tuning into the vocal sound. Does the sound match not only the band, but match the vibe of the song? Some things capture that perfectly, other things not so much. What was it? Jeff Emmerich used to tell the story of John Lennon for Tomorrow Never Knows, wanted to hang him up, or he wanted Jeff to hang him upside down and turn him around to give him the sound that he wanted on the vocal. And Jeff said, that could be difficult. So he ended up putting his microphone into a Leslie and then spinning it and doing that. And it's perfect for that song. I mean, it works. It was a brilliant idea, and it's continued to be used to this day. So the vocal sound is the thing that really moves me. And with a great singer like a George Michael or, someone, or James Taylor, I want you to tune in immediately on the sound of that voice. So, and if I get the same thing from another mix, then that's part of what's going to move me. It needs to follow an emotional arc. I want to know that I'm going from here into there, and I want to be taken on a journey there. I'm not interested. It's not that I'm not interested. I love dance music. I loved Chic and I loved all that. But for me, I'm not dancing. I'm a listener mostly, and I want to be taken on a journey. And so all of these things, in a lot of ways, are related to emotion. I don't get. Many years ago, when I first started out, I was much more concerned about frequency response. But I really don't give a shit about that anymore, because I know now that the songs whose mixes I most love, many of Jeff Emmerich's, for example, Elliot Shiner's, George Massenburg, any of these greats, when I listen to their mixes, I'm not worried about frequency response, because all the frequencies that you need to get the emotion are there. It may not have the widest top or bottom, but it works, and so that's it for me. I'd say 90% emotional. If I have to analyze frequencies, I'm not into that really. I mean, I can do it. I can tell you that it's a little weak at 100 hertz, or I can tell you that I wish there were more air on the top. But I'm much more concerned first with the emotional impact. So I don't know if that's an answer or not, but there you go.
What kinds of things do you do in production or mixing to help people connect more with a song?
Well, it depends a little bit what the music is. I primarily work on, rock or pop music, which, almost always inevitably will have a vocal involved. And for me, the vocal is always the centerpiece of what people are going to be connecting with emotionally. It's the most direct emotional communication for the song. It's what's stating what's being said. It carries the lyrics, carries a melody, and there's a huge amount of emotional expression in how those lyrics and melodies are delivered when they're put together by the singer. And so that is unquestionably my primary focus, is to make sure that that vocal is something that I believe when they're singing it, first of all. And I use that reference a lot when I'm working with singers, and they'll sing a line, and I'll feel like, I don't believe you. Like, I have to believe you for this to really mean something to me. And it's crucially important. And try and help them navigate to a place where either reconnecting to the feeling that they had when they first had the idea for the song. It can be a really great exercise to do, and tap into those very true feelings that are connected with what's being said. And often it will help guide them to a place where they're really singing from their heart, and it makes a huge difference. So that's unquestionably the primary focus for making sure that a song, a musical statement, an emotional statement will connect with a listener. And then for me, I realized at a certain point that sound unto itself communicates emotions as well. How the low end impacts and how transitions happen from one section to another have a tremendous amount of emotional impact to them. And so I focus on those things a lot. And at the end of the day, I'm really just getting it so it makes me feel something, and hopefully other people will experience it the same way. I haven't really tried to second guess it beyond that. Like, the ultimate test for me when I'm working on a song is, at a certain point, I just stop worrying about all the crap in the room, plugins and gear and all the stuff, and I just let the song wash over me, and just listen to it, and just turn it up, and just see what it feels like in the room. And that is the ultimate test for me, ultimately. There's all these sort of technical considerations that you go through to try and navigate to that place. But it has to feel like something to me. I have to feel it in the room. And then that's when I know, okay, this is working. And so, I try to experience it the same way that a new listener would, and just see how it feels.
What techniques do you use on the vocals throughout the song to connect better with the listener?
I think it kind of depends on the song. It's very song driven. I think something, again, that I try to be very cognizant of, and I feel like the majority of, let's say, kind of like when I say top 40, just like whatever's on the charts, whatever your genre of choice is, I feel like we as collectively as mixers and engineers and producers, we've gotten very kind of one-dimensional in terms of kind of vocal techniques and treatments. Not so much in the effects, but it's like, well, what are we trying to do? And I feel like it's almost become a very much like vocal needs to be out front and on top at all times. And that's just the goal, right? How do we get the vocal up front, on top of the track? I want to hear every word, hear every syllable, hear every little like bubble on their tongue and every little lip smack and every little, like, that's kind of just been like status quo. And when you listen to a lot of, let's say classic songs, or some of the songs that we revere as to be kind of like some of the most influential songs of all time, it's amazing how many words you can't quite hear. You almost have to listen a little harder. How sometimes the vocal being set back a little bit actually changes the feel of the track, and it changes a little bit of how the listener interacts with the track. And it's probably a lot of it's subliminal. Like, most people don't know what they're listening to. They can't pinpoint, oh, I like that vocal because it's got a cool reverb. They just like, oh, I like that vocal sound. But I feel like we've gotten very one-dimensional with just like everything's just got to be squashed up front, sound like it's right here. Whereas I feel like we can utilize our tools to more convey the vocal and what the vocal's trying to convey to the listener, we can utilize our tools to help do that instead of just squashing it and putting it out front and on top all the time. So I feel like I've been trying to be a little bit more cognizant of that. It's hard to get people to like artists and record company guys, and like it's hard to convince people when you send them a mix and the vocals not just screaming out, loud and compressed and bright, and even if it's a song where it's like you want it to be a little bit more moody, and you want the listener to almost feel disconnected from the singer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that way, when the payoff comes and then they are up front and on top of the mix, then it's like, oh, well, they're there. Like, I feel like that's not taken into consideration anymore. It's all about just like sonically getting it here, and that's it. So I've been trying to play a lot with setting vocals instead of just making them up just in your face, like trying to listen to what the song's trying to do. What's the lyric trying to do? What's the feeling that we're trying to convey? And if the feeling is longing, or if the feeling is, not necessarily having somebody sitting right here on my lap singing in my ear, like, how can I do that as a mixer to help convey that message a little bit more? And then it also, I think the other thing that does is when you do want to have the vocal be screaming in somebody's face or singing softly right into your ear, it gives you that dynamic of now that's more impactful because the rest of the song hasn't been just here the whole time. So different, not over compressing as much, not just squashing everything and limiting everything, using volume as just a little bit of a tool to pull back in certain parts, making the listener kind of maybe just pay a little bit more attention because it's not so loud and it's not so in your face, being like, like draw them in a little bit as opposed to just feed them everything. Vocals are tough. Vocals are by far, vocals are the toughest thing to do properly because there's so many variables to interpret kind of how it should be presented. There's a million different ways to kind of make a vocal track work, and I find them the most challenging. But that's the thing that I'm trying to do more of, is just really be purposeful of like, okay, what's the vocal trying to convey, and then building the treatment around that, as opposed to it just being status quo, slammed in your face on top of the track, loud, squashed, and bright.
Besides that, is there any technique you use to achieve a clear low end?
Just really compression and EQ, just to really make sure what is the purpose of the bass in this track, who's going to get those frequencies. If it's the really low frequencies, down the bottom across here, is that going to be all for the bass? Where's the kick going to go? Is the kick going to be sat in there as well, or am I going to place the kick a bit higher so I can really devote all of this band of the bottom of my mix to the bass? But then it's still about controlling the frequencies, compressing them, maybe limiting them if that's necessary. Maybe on the return of the effect that's widening, chorus or really tight delay, I may limit that just to really hold it in place tight. And again, with an EQ before that widening effect, I can really determine what frequencies I push into the widening effect, or which ones I remove. So that's really my approach. It's so meticulous, a lot of detail, a lot of trial and error always. You're never going to, I don't think you're ever going to arrive at the immediate solution on the first go. You'll get near it, but then as you get more in the mix and you add more instruments, you're often constantly going to have to adapt a little bit.
How do you use the bleed from different microphones to add more dimension?
Oh, it's everything. It's everything. Bleed is something that nowadays we frown upon, and we try to get it out there as much as possible. I mean, we're creating tools. I don't think I've used a gate on a snare in 10 years. Like I haven't. Put the mic in the right place, get the balance right, you're good to go. Especially with piano, and you're putting piano and drums in a room. Like the crucial part where that is kind of like where how far the piano is away from the drums. Because the further away the piano is, the more it's going to sound like a ambient mic for the kit. So, put that fucking drum set right by the piano if you can, and you're going to get less. You'll be surprised how much less bleed you're getting, and how much it helps the drum sound. You know, that's an old technique that, it's like, I learned talking to Rudy Van Gelder, who did all the, all the fucking jazz records back in the day. And, bleed is something that if you have a great musician who plays really good and kind of balances himself, especially a drummer, bleed's great. You're never going to hear it, but you're going to feel it. And if you hear it, that's fine too. It's just, I've done a lot of records where the bleed has always been like, that's, riding the vocals up and down. And people are like, why does the balance change a little bit? I'm like, well, this, they're like, no, it sounds great. And they don't even know what it is. They just feel it, They're like, it just feels great. So I'm a big fan of it. It's like, again, especially like microphones, drums, guitars in a room. I always back mics off the guitar amp. It's like, they're not right on the grill. They are sometimes for certain sounds, but most of the time 6 inches away, and just you get a little bit of bleed into that microphone. It's funny when you start isolating things and you're like, oh shit, part of my drum sound went away, or part of that upright bass sounds different now, So you just got to be smart where you put the instruments out in the room, make the difference.
So when you're tuning during mixing, when you're using autotune, how do you do that? You just tune like a word or something, or it's automatic?
Usually just global. If I hear like it's a little wandering, then I'll just dial it into the right key and I'll listen. And, I'll make sure that it's not overcorrecting, like stair-stepping, bendy notes and stuff like that. The things that auto-tune does not do well is it doesn't handle vibrato well, and it doesn't handle slow, bendy notes well. So a lot of times if I need to correct certain notes, but other notes are bending, I'll just split it into 2 tracks, and I'll put the untuned on one track and the tuned on another. And I can just very easily drag different lines or pieces of lines of the performance to one or the other and audition them and go like, okay, is it better tuned or better untuned? Better tuned, better untuned. And I'll just go like that. And a lot of times when I'm mixing vocals, I'll do the same concept with EQ and treatment. So, if you have a vocal performance that's really soft in the verse, and then it builds a little bit in intensity in the pre-chorus, and then they're belting at full voice in the chorus, often I'm splitting that into at least 3 different lead vocal tracks: the verse, the pre, and the hook. And if the verse has a significant change in energy over the course of, say, 8 or 16 bars, then I may split into a verse A and a verse B. And because, I find that the EQ needed on a voice when they're whisper quiet is completely different than the EQ needed on a voice when they're belting powerfully. And same applies with compression ratios and things like that. When you dial in the perfect compression on the quiet stuff, you're way over compressing the loud stuff. So instead of trying to manage everything on one track, I split and just try and manage sections and pair the comparable styles of vocal performance on the same tracks. So that's how I handle that.
Besides that, is there any technique you use to achieve a clear low end?
Just really compression and EQ. Just to really make sure, what is the purpose of the bass in this track? Who's going to get those frequencies? If it's the really low frequencies, down the bottom across here, is that going to be all for the bass? Where's the kick going to go? Is the kick going to be set in there as well, or am I going to place the kick a bit higher so I can really devote all of this band of the bottom of my mix to the bass? But then it's still about controlling the frequencies, compressing them, maybe limiting them if that's necessary. Maybe on the return of the effect that's widening chorus or really tight delay, I may limit that just to really hold it in place tight. And again, with an EQ before that widening effect, I can really determine what frequencies I push into it, into the widening effect, or which ones I remove. So that's really my approach. It's so meticulous, you know, a lot of detail, a lot of trial and error always. You're never going to, I don't think you're ever going to arrive at the immediate solution on the first go. You'll get near it, but then as you get more in the mix and you add more instruments, you're often constantly going to have to adapt a little bit.